Professor in Chemistry and Special Assistant for the Arts and Sciences Dean for Graduate Education. And this is Lisa Barrow. Lisa's a postdoc in biology. She received an NSF GRFP and then an NSF postdoc, so she's clearly got the Midas touch. So what we're going to do today is go over sort of the basics of the GRFP components. There's a lot of things we know about things you should be thinking about and how to approach this. And we are fortunate to have 3 faculty on this campus who do the NSF panel reviews of GRFPs. So Jeff Rack in chemistry, Michael Graves in anthropology, and Laura Crossie in earth and planetary sciences. We also have we always have students who have received them and are happy to talk about their experiences and applications. So next week, this same time, we will at a minimum have Jeff and Michael here, plus 2 students. And if Laura Crossie gets back from her trip in time, she'll also be here, so you can get some advice from people who read these. And a lot of the analysis is really field independent, so regardless of your area, this will be really useful. We are, for the first time, we're recording this, and we'll record next week's, and they'll be posted a couple of different places. I just had a meeting with the Graduate Studies Dean, and she's going to link to them from the Grad Studies website. My other role is I run a big NSF project, Advance at UNM, which is working on improving the climate for women and minority STEM faculty. And so it's actually through that role we're taping it, and it's going to be on our Advance at UNM YouTube channel. So there should be a couple of different ways to find it. If you want to go back over things, or you have friends who can't be here, and you say, oh, you really need to listen to the faculty talk about how they review things. So those will be available too. And so we're going to dive right in with talking about the proposal and the process. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and then I'll provide comic relief as appropriate. Or maybe other advice.
Yeah, so feel free to ask questions throughout. And this, we're recording it, it'll be available, and then there's the handouts. We can email those out in case you didn't pick one up. So today we'll go over an overview of the fellowship and the components required for the application. And if any of you were here in May, this is basically the same spiel. I did it back then too. And then next week, as Julia mentioned, we'll do the panel discussions. And then for 3 weeks, I'm going to organize a sort of peer review and feedback, and I'll send emails about that with more details about how those are going to run. So generally, in case you guys are just now learning about this or haven't quite gotten started yet, these are some of the things that you should start doing now. Like when you go home the rest of this week, you should read up on the program solicitation, so make sure you find that, and that will be sort of your guide. Everything about how to put together this application is in that solicitation. You can also set up your online application in Fastlane now. And you should, if you haven't already, contact people who are going to write your letters of recommendation. And you need at least 3. But there are spaces to put up to 5, and it's strongly encouraged that you do that. And then finally, you can request your transcripts now. So you can start getting the ball rolling. Then by the end of September, and hopefully by that first peer review session, you'll have a draft of your 2 main essays that are the main components of this application. So that'll be the 3-page personal background and goals statement and the 2-page graduate research plan, which we'll go into in detail.
And let me add, you submit these directly to NSF. You do not go through our sponsored research office. You set up an online application. The GRFPs are different from everything else. Do not believe anyone who tells you you need to set up CAIUs, you need to do. You don't. This is strictly an interaction between you and NSF. So you don't have to worry about getting any on-campus approval in that sense.
Yep. And then the other thing you should do now is make sure you know what exact day is your deadline. So these depend on what field you're in. And so all of this is available in the solicitation and on the website, which I'll show you at the end of this. So in case you're not totally sold on whether you want to do this, there are lots of benefits to applying, even if you're not one of the people who gets the award. Being able to write a really compelling grant proposal is an essential part of science. Practicing the communication of how important your work is, especially to people who might not be in your direct field, is also incredibly important. This proposal, this whole package helps you focus your ideas on what you want to do in grad school. Even if you haven't decided what grad school you're going to go to yet, what exact program you want to do, this whole package will help you really focus in and think about what is most exciting to you and what you want to focus on. And then you'll receive feedback. So the reviewers will provide written feedback, even if whether you get the award or not, you'll get that feedback, which can be helpful for future grant applications. And then if you are one of the people who are selected, you can join this amazing graphic of how successful UNM students have been at obtaining these awards. Over the past 5 years, these are people who either did their undergraduate at UNM or are graduate students at UNM now. And so there have been a number of awards across these different fields. And so hopefully we'll get to add to that this year. So the basics of what the award entails, it's 3 years of support, $34,000 a year with a cost of education allowance. So whatever graduate institution you go to will get $12,000 a year that'll go towards your tuition. You can use these 3 years of support spread out over 5 years, which means you can put 2 of those years on reserve. You still have to be enrolled as a graduate student, but this allows you to make use of other opportunities. Maybe you want to teach while you're a grad student. You can put your award on hold for a year so that you can serve as a TA in your department, for example.
Can you put the first year on reserve possible, or does it matter?
You can, but you have to be enrolled in a graduate program.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. And so they anticipate awarding 2,000 of these this year, and that's spread across all STEM fields. So last year there were over 13,000 applicants, and so that's a funding success rate of about 15%, which is not bad compared to some of the other bigger grant funding success rates. And another great thing about this program is that if you're an undergraduate or you've finished your undergrad but haven't gone to grad school yet, you need to know exactly what graduate program you're applying to. So these awards are awarding an individual, so you don't have to know exactly what you're going to do in grad school yet. And then, as I mentioned, those 2 years you can put on reserve. You can also use them to take advantage of some of these other opportunities that NSF offers, like the Graduate Research Opportunities Worldwide, where you can go abroad and collaborate with researchers overseas, or internships with federal agencies like EPA or Department of Defense, various agencies. So, eligibility. Hopefully all of you have already checked to make sure that you're eligible. You must be a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national, or permanent resident. And the timeline, you can either be an undergraduate planning to go to grad school or a post-bac student that hasn't yet started grad school. Or if you're a graduate student, as of last year's competition, once you start grad school, you can only apply once. So you have to choose whether you're going to do it in your first year or your second year. And it's best to sort of consult with your mentors and figure out when you're going to be most competitive. So you'll be competing against other people that are at your same level. So if you're a first-year grad student and you already have a publication or two out the door, that'll probably make you look really, really strong. but it'll just depend on your field, and it's best to just talk with your mentors in terms of deciding when is the best time, first or second year as a grad student.
You can apply once as an undergrad and once as a grad student.
You can apply as many times as you want before you start grad school, technically, but, okay. So let's see. As Julia mentioned, these are submitted directly to NSF through Fastlane, so you don't have to go through sponsored research. And now is the time to start setting up your online application in Fastlane if you haven't already. And I can show you at the end what that looks like. There's a really nice guide on the NSF GRFP website that shows you step by step what it looks like when you're working with Fastlane. Sometimes it can be a little confusing to work through all their different menus. And then again, make sure you figure out what your application deadline is. And it's due 5 p.m. of your local time that day, whatever date.
And the references are usually due a couple of days later.
November 2nd. Yeah, so letters for all fields are due November 2nd this year, and that's a hard deadline of 5 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure you get on your references, ask them early, and follow up with them. I'm fairly certain in Fastlane you can see once your references have submitted, so if it's getting down to the wire and they still haven't submitted, follow up with them and make sure they get it done. All right, so we'll go through these different components in more detail, but basically the whole application will look like this 3-page personal statement, your 2-page graduate research plan, your minimum of 3 reference letters, and you can list up to 5, your academic transcripts, and then a number of other things, personal information about you that you'll enter into the Fastlane module. So you'll need to choose what your proposed program and field of study is. There's a whole long list of them at the end of the solicitation, so you can decide exactly what field your research best falls into. You'll need your title for your proposal, and then personal information about your background, a list of awards, any relevant research experience, presentations you've given, publications you might have, and then one last thing is that GRE scores aren't part of the package anymore, so don't worry about that. I don't think there's not even a place to put them in anymore. I don't think it's part of the application at all. So for your letters of reference, minimum of 3 are required, and up to 5 can be listed. So if you have 5 people that know you well enough, that can speak to your abilities, your potential as a future leader in STEM, you should definitely list 5. So you'll rank them based on who you prefer, and your 5 people never need to know if they were a backup or not. So if you you can list 5, and then if maybe your top person is a top person in the field who just gets way too busy and can't get the letter in on time, NSF will go to your 4th person, and then you'll still have your 3 letters. So a really good idea, if you can, to list 4 or 5 people. Your references need to be people who know you well and know your background, who know your research abilities, or can speak to whatever aspects of your graduate plan that you have. So if you have someone that you've been volunteering with for a long time that might connect into your broader impacts that you're proposing, that would be a good reference. People who have mentored you in undergraduate research or your graduate research mentor are obviously really good people. Again, contact them early. Make sure that they know what exactly NSF is looking for in these letters. And so there's information on the GRFP website that will tell them exactly what sort of things they should include in these letters, and provide them with copies of your application. And specifically, if you write about some experience in your essays, something that was really important to you in developing your ideas or helping you decide that this is the track, this is the field you want to go into, if you write about an experience, try to have someone write a letter for you that's going to speak to that experience.
Yeah, and this advice comes from the experience a UNM student had a couple of years ago, where they wrote about a really pivotal undergraduate research experience that led them to the research area they were interested in, didn't have a letter from that faculty member, and every reviewer caught that and dinged them for it. So you want to spend time thinking about what are you likely to be writing about, what do you want reviewers to speak to. And you can ask your letter writers, like, it would be very helpful if you could talk about X. And then ask someone else, can you talk about Y? So if someone knows about your lab skills or has seen you give presentations or has a very specific experience with you that will strengthen that, don't assume that's what they'll write about. Go ahead and ask them. Say it would be really helpful if you include, this. And then spread what you want highlighted across the letters so that the letters are highlighting different aspects of your accomplishments. This will also make it easier for your letter writers, which are then more likely to write the letters.
Cool. And then, so we'll talk a little bit about these two main merit review criteria. So all of the reviewers that get your application basically are going to be looking for two things: intellectual merit and broader impacts. And so having a really good handle of what those things mean and how your application is going to demonstrate those things is critical to getting a good review score. So intellectual merit is basically your potential to advance knowledge, either in your specific field or across fields. And so reviewers are going to be looking for this potential to advance knowledge based on your background, what you've done in the past, your ability to put together a really coherent research plan, your scholarly ability, and they'll look at things like your academic record, your transcripts, and of course your letters of recommendation. So they're going to take this holistic view of the entire application to try to find evidence that you have the potential to advance knowledge and has demonstrated potential for making significant research achievements. So NSF is looking for potential STEM leaders. And so basically, as you're putting together your application, make sure that this really comes across. And a lot of times it's recommended in each of your two essays to even have a heading or a bolded statement where you're explicitly pointing out what is the intellectual merit of what you've done and what you're planning to do. That really helps reviewers key in on it and find it. Then the second criteria is broader impacts, which is the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. And so this one was really tricky for me when I was first starting out and had never really heard this term and didn't quite know what it meant. And NSF has kind of gone back and forth on putting together a list of examples or not offering a list of examples. But I think this is where it really helps to look at some example essays so you can get some ideas of what is a broader impact. And these can be things that benefit society in sort of the overall. So how does your overall research plan, how is that going to benefit society? If you're working on, increasing biodiversity, or if you're working on, other examples.
Alternative energy sources.
Yeah,
So it could be
sustainability.
This isn't intellectually what we accomplish. This is how will the research address some aspect of a societal problem. Be really careful if you've got a biomedical application, make sure you're talking about fundamental research. It's okay if it's got a long-term sort of medical or biomedical application, but the research has to be fundamental NSF research, not NIH. And it can also be about how you personally can inspire people, teach people, reach out to underserved communities. There's a lot of different approaches, and this is the hardest part, and it will remain the hardest part of NSF proposals throughout your entire career. Because it is always the hardest part, and they always keep changing their mind about what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And this is the one that you absolutely have to call out broader impact statements.
Yep.
Because it's going to be easier for the reviewers to pull intellectual merit from your package. I mean, you want to highlight it if you can, but this one you really need to do all the work for them. It's like, this is what I think my broader impacts are.
Yeah. Yeah, so then in addition to sort of the broader impacts of your research to society, these are examples of the different outcomes that you can have that benefit society. So if you've done things like tutoring or working with underrepresented groups, or maybe you like science blogging or something that makes science more accessible to the public. So this is a list that is good to read through. Definitely, they don't expect you to have, no coherent proposal will have all of these things. These are just examples of, you know, pick out 2 or 3 things that you feel like you've really made an impact with, or that you plan to make an impact with in your proposed research that will benefit society. All right, so then just some general advice on writing your 2 statements. So NSF is not just looking to fund people to do their graduate degrees, they're looking to fund people who are going to be the future of STEM, who are going to be leaders in science, tech, engineering, and math. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you have leadership potential, either through your past activities, and hopefully, you know, you can talk with your letter writers about this and how they can really highlight your leadership qualities, and what your passions are and your motivation for why you want a career in STEM. Be yourself. So these statements basically are a way for the reviewers to get to know you, and so you have to find a way to personalize it to really show your passion for why this specific field that you chose to pursue, how you got there, what excited you, what experiences really led you to where you are and what you want to do. So you should use appropriate scientific form for the research plan. So if it's appropriate in your field to have hypotheses, and you should have references, literature cited, but keep in mind that's part of the 2-page limit. So be very brief and only use the very few key ones you need to really set up the research plan. If you have room, be great to include a figure. But at the same time, you don't want to be too technical. You don't want to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty details of how specifically you're going to accomplish your research. So the tricky thing about this proposal is that it needs to come across really clearly why the research you're proposing is important. So what's the background for it, and what sort of impact it's going to make, and show that you can put together a coherent proposal, something that makes sense, but doesn't have so much nitty-gritty detail that people slightly outside of your field aren't going to be able to follow it. And then if you can develop basically a consistent theme throughout your 2 essays, obviously the research plan is going to be a little bit more technical than the personal statement, but hopefully they can sort of balance each other out and weave together to tell your whole story of who you are, what you're trying to do.
And they should have the same voice. Right? They should sound like they were written by the same person. The research statement will be more technical, but it shouldn't go from a really, really informal personal statement to something that sounds like you lifted it from an advisor's grant proposal. So this is your package, so it needs to be also consistent in the voice. They don't have to be identical, but it has to be clear they were written by the same person.
Yeah, so for the personal statement, so this is the 3-page essay that includes both your background, sort of how you got to where you are, your research, your previous research experience, and your future goals. So what you wanna do in graduate school and beyond. So you need to be able to tell a compelling story to get the reviewer's attention. What makes you unique to where you got to? Again, as Julia mentioned, the statement should reflect your voice. And both of these statements need to have intellectual merit and broader impacts apparent in the statement. So either as their own headings, or broader impacts should probably always have its own heading, just so reviewers can easily find it. And then this is the essay where you demonstrate what in your past experiences and what in your future goals are going to show the reviewers that you want to be and will be a leader in STEM. And then another piece of advice is that if you, in the future goals, you introduce what your research interests are, and you kind of write it as how your previous research background led to your current and future research interests, this will help you save some space in the research plan, which is only 2 pages. So then for the research plan, how specific you are kind of depends on your stage. So undergraduates need to know sort of the general area and pick a topic that they might want to focus on. Graduate students should have a much better idea based on what lab you're already in. And something that's really important to make clear if you're a UNM grad student is why is UNM a good place for you to do this plan, to do this research plan? Do you have the resources here, either the faculty you're going to work with or whatever facilities you might need to accomplish your research? You have to be able to demonstrate that it's a feasible plan and that UNM or wherever you choose to go makes sense for accomplishing that plan. So the literature cited, your references count in this length, so make sure that you only pick the really essential ones to sort of set up the background for what you're going to do. And if you happen to have published in the area, definitely reference yourself. They'll have your list of publications also, but definitely try to remind reviewers of the really key pieces that make you stand out. And then, as I mentioned, so if you're already here or if you're an undergraduate and you're proposing a grad school to go to, make sure that that grad school is appropriate for what you're proposing to do and that you have a potential person to work with there that would be a good mentor for that particular project. And then, all right, assume that the reviewer is a general expert in your broad field. So you can't kind of make claims that no one has ever done this before, because you might get a reviewer who really knows your specific topic. But you are more likely to get someone who knows your general field but might not know your exact topic and won't understand the nitty-gritty details. So you have to write it so that it's really scientifically sound in case you do get an expert in your field, but of broad enough, able to be understood by a broad enough audience in case you have reviewers that are slightly outside your field. And this comes back to, again, make sure these statements are written in your voice. And the research statement is going to be a little more technical, but should be obvious that you wrote both of them.
And the things that we're repeating over and over and over are the things that people have the most trouble with and that we see.
And we hear reviewers say, this is a problem.
People getting dinged for.
All right, so the program website, nsfgrfp.org, is where most of this information comes from, and there's a huge list of frequently asked questions on there in case you have specific questions for NSF. Their contact information is on there, so you can email or call them. You can email or call program officers with questions, but check the frequently asked questions first before you do that. Then the solicitation, read through it multiple times. It's really long and boring, but you could miss some little detail that would just cause your application to be disqualified completely, which would be awful after spending so much time on it. And then there's a few websites up here that just have previous examples of successful proposals, so you can get an idea, look at a few of them from different fields to see sort of what people did well, how they made themselves stand out, and then think about how you can make yourself stand out. Then we handed out just sort of a guide for as you're thinking about your statements, what questions you should be asking yourself. Make sure you hit those in each of your statements. And then there's an example rubric for what would make a really strong application, what might be a weaker application. So you can kind of look through that as you're revising your own essays before the peer review sessions.
And people frequently have the most trouble with the personal essay, and sometimes you can have trouble figuring out what to write. Talk to your friends, talk to your parents, talk to your mentor, and get what do you think is unique about me? What do you think is interesting about me? And that may get you some ideas. And that's the one where you're probably just going to have to write, knowing that nothing you write initially is going to end up in the final essay. But get started. Do not write chronologically. When I was in grade school, I was always interested in this. And then in high school, I did this. And then in college, I did this. You've lost the reviewer. You're going to have to pick an interesting point to start. Or a substantive point. It doesn't have to be an entertaining anecdote or a cool anecdote. It could just be a substantive point. But in terms of what makes sense for you and the way you think about it. But don't hesitate to talk to your friends, talk to faculty, whoever, if you're really stuck about, well, there's nothing special about me. I guarantee you there is. And the people that know you are the ones who can help you figure that out if you're stuck.
Yeah, and then just wanted to show you in case you haven't already, this is the portal that you're actually going to use to submit your whole application, so fastlane.nsf.gov. And for this particular program, you'll go to the Graduate Research Fellowship Program link, and then you can set up if you haven't already, register, fill out your information, and then make sure you don't forget your password like I always do. And then this is the other NSF GRFP website, which has a lot of really useful information for applicants, everything you need to know, tips for applying, those frequently asked questions are on here. So definitely consult this. And then down here is the program solicitation. So that you should definitely, if you don't already have it, make sure you download it, read through it very carefully. And then this was the frequently asked questions, giant list. But we're happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah. So if we write in our research proposal, like I'm a first year, so I'm not actually officially in a group yet, so I don't have any. So if I write that and then science takes me another like, are you required to do the
No.
thing?
Right.
No, they are funding your potential to be a leader. You can do something completely different,
Okay.
totally different.
Yep.
And that happens.
You can change schools. If you're a master's student and you might get the NSF, you can use it for 1 year at one school and then take the other 2 years with you to a PhD program somewhere else.
No, it's very
Yeah,
much about
it's-
you.
Okay.
But then in your case, there's a reason you're here and not somewhere else.
Right. Right.
So that's the starting point.
Yeah.
see, that would be both though, right?
Yeah, and then like, or somebody that can attest to your performance in the classroom, or should you have like kind of everything?
So, I mean, you can answer this better probably, but I think they're most interested in your research potential. But if you have someone that could speak to your skills at work or something, like, I think that would be fine too.
Because it's about leadership too.
Yeah.
And if you take, someone can write about you taking the initiative or solving problems, is a reliable worker, is always on time, isn't going to help you. But, if you've been doing technical work at Los Alamos, for example, then yeah, that would definitely help. You definitely need at least one letter from someone here. But if you had a lot of undergraduate experience and you can get, someone who saw your work there, then that's important too. We can't emphasize enough, try and get 5 people. Someone gets sick, someone gets busy, whatever, so that you make sure you end up with 3 letters.
I had a question about the pool, because you were mentioning about 15% are expected to be funded, but we're also only competing against people at the same level. So do you know sort of like on a level breakdown what that pie sort of breaks down to?
I don't know if they break it down.
I don't know.
How
I
they
don't
break
understand
it
how
down.
we're only
Because-
competing against our own level if we're all competing for the same.
Well, because then there's a lot of horse trading and stuff between the NSF program managers. So very much, yes, senior undergrads are compared to senior undergrads, first year grad students compared to first year grad students. And then, some percentage of each of those are picked, but then there is also geographical distribution that they take into account and a bunch of other things. So there's a lot of behind the scenes considerations that go into it, so that they don't all go to California and East Coast schools.
Sure.
So this might be kind of dumb, but I finished a master's already, but I want to do a PhD. And I've been out of school for a year and a half. And I know there must be like 2 years break. And we have to just grant the break. But I just wondered if I could apply now for a start in the fall, or if I have to wait longer. To have 2
They
years.
tend to take the timelines extremely seriously.
Okay, so it'd have
but-
to be 2 years from like October, basically, because that would be when.
I would actually call because it's a 2-year break in school. So if you're already in school.
But I'm not in school right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so I'm hoping to apply
Oh,
for
oh.
fall 2018.
Oh,
But I think
would-
if there's not a major change in field or some extenuating circumstance,
I
might
would-
be hard to,
I would call,
Justify.
that's a call to program manager.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
I guess that one, I should wrap that up. So it's master's to master's myself. Is that something that disqualifies me? I've completed a master's degree, entering a second one, first year and second one. Is that something different fields?
I think there's a list of what makes you ineligible, and I think completing the requirements for a graduate program makes you ineligible.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I would check the list.
Okay.
Double check an email or call them to make sure. Yeah, because there's language about if it's a significant change in direction or if, then maybe, but yeah, I'm not sure. Check with
Yeah,
them.
anything that comes right up in the gray area, just call it. That's their job.
Yeah.
They're helpful, I call them April.
Yeah, no, they are. They want to help.
Yeah.
Is that
Let's see, I think it's on.
No, that's the fast line number.
Yeah, that's their email.
Yeah.
And that's their phone.
Other questions for that? Okay, well, go forth and start your online applications. Think about your references. We will have a couple of faculty here next Wednesday to review these and can tell you a lot more about exactly what that's like and what they do.